They called him the forgotten father at Meridian Financial Tower. Noah Johnson worked double shifts, lived on cans of sardines, and gave away his only decent meal to a janitor he thought had even less than him. But that janitor wasn't poor at all. In fact, he was testing something that would change Noah's life forever. When 12 lawyers in $1,000 suits showed up at Noah's cramped apartment the next morning, he thought he was being evicted. Instead, they handed him papers that made his hands shake and his knees buckle. Papers that revealed the janitor's true identity and why one simple act of kindness had triggered the most extraordinary chain of events. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Noah Johnson had perfected the art of being invisible. In a 40-story glass tower, filled with people in expensive suits and polished shoes, he moved like a shadow between the cubicles on the 32nd floor. Data entry clerk, night shift, employee ID number 4471. That's all he was to Meridian Financial Tower. Most nights, Noah arrived at 6 p.m. sharp, sliding his worn keycard through the reader with a quiet beep that announced another 12 hours of thankless work ahead. The elevator ride to the 32nd floor was always the same, fluorescent lights humming overhead, the faint smell of industrial carpet cleaner, and the weight of exhaustion already settling into his shoulders before his shift even began. At 34, Noah looked older, the kind of older that comes not from years, but from carrying burdens that most people his age couldn't imagine. His car keys were always pressed, even though they came from the discount rack at Goodwill. His button-down shirts were clean, though. The collars had begun to fray after countless washings. He kept his appearance neat, not out of vanity, but out of necessity. In a place like Meridian Financial, looking the part was the difference between keeping a job and losing it. But Noah had a secret that none of his co-workers knew. Every morning, when his shift ended at 6 a.m., he didn't go home to rest like a normal person. Instead, he drove 15 minutes across town to Pinehurst Elementary School, where he volunteered as a crossing guard for 2 hours before the exhaustion finally forced him to sleep. The kids called him Mr. Noah, and their bright faces were the only thing that made the sleepless nights worth it. The reason was simple, though Noah never talked about it. 3 years ago, his world had collapsed in a single moment. Emma, his wife of 8 years, had been crossing a street just like the one he now guarded when a distracted driver ran a red light. The settlement money had paid for the funeral, and nothing more. The life insurance barely covered 6 months of bills, and suddenly Noah found himself alone, drowning in debt, clinging to the only job he could find that paid enough to keep him afloat. The Meridian Financial Tower was a monument to success. 40 floors of gleaming offices where deals worth millions of dollars were made every day. Investment advisors, wealth managers, and financial consultants filled the upper floors, while people like Noah, the data processors, security guards, and cleaning staff, occupied the forgotten spaces in between. It was an ecosystem of invisible people keeping the machine running while others took the credit. Noah's desk was tucked in the corner of the 32nd floor, next to a window that looked out over the city lights. During his breaks, he would stare out at those lights and wonder about the people behind them. Were they happy? Were they struggling like him? Did they feel as alone as he did in a city of 3 million people? His routine was religiously simple. Clock in at 6 p.m. Process insurance claims until midnight. Take a 30-minute break in the small break room. Work until 6 a.m. Drive to the school. Guard the crosswalk. Go home. Sleep for 4 hours. Repeat. The only variation in his schedule was lunch, which he ate at his desk while continuing to work, trying to squeeze every minute of productivity from his shift. Tonight felt different, though Noah couldn't put his finger on why. The building seemed quieter than usual, even for a night shift. The elevator had made an odd grinding sound on the way up, and when he'd passed the security desk in the lobby, The guard, an older man with kind eyes whom Noah had never actually spoken to, had looked at him with an expression that seemed almost expectant. As Noah settled into his desk chair, adjusting the small desk lamp that provided the only warm light in the sterile office space, he pulled out his dinner. Tonight's meal was a turkey sandwich from the deli counter at Morrison's Market, his one decent meal of the week. He'd saved up for it, choosing it over the usual can of sardines, because tomorrow was payday, and he'd allowed himself this small luxury. The sandwich was wrapped in white deli paper, and Noah could smell the fresh bread and real turkey through the wrapping. It was a simple thing, but after months of surviving on whatever was cheapest, the prospect of eating something that actually resembled food made his stomach growl with anticipation. As he unwrapped the sandwich, taking a moment to appreciate the thick slices of turkey and the crisp lettuce, Noah heard the soft squeak of wheels approaching his desk. He looked up to see the night janitor pushing his cart slowly down the aisle between the cubicles. The janitor was a man Noah had seen countless times, but never really noticed. Medium height, probably in his 50s, with graying hair and clothes that looked like they'd seen better decades. His uniform was clean but faded, and he moved with the careful precision of someone who took pride in work that others considered beneath notice. What caught Noah's attention tonight was something he'd never observed before. The man looked tired, not just end-of-shift tired, but bone-deep exhausted. The kind of exhaustion that comes from working too hard for too little, from worrying about bills that never seem to get smaller, from carrying burdens that no one else can see. As the janitor passed Noah's desk, their eyes met for just a moment. In that brief connection, Noah saw something that made his chest tighten with recognition. It was the same look he saw in his own mirror every morning. The expression of someone who was doing their best to stay afloat in a world that seemed determined to pull them under. The janitor nodded politely and continued past. But something about that moment stuck with Noah. Here was another invisible person, another forgotten soul grinding through the night shift while the rest of the world slept. And suddenly, Noah's turkey sandwich didn't seem like such a necessity anymore. The first thing you learned about survival was that dignity couldn't be bought, but it could be maintained. Noah Johnson understood this better than most people. Every morning after his shift at Meridian Financial Tower, he would sit in his beat-up Honda Civic in the employee parking garage for exactly 10 minutes, just breathing. It was his transition ritual, the brief pause that separated night shift Noah from crossing guard Noah. The Honda was 15 years old, with 240,000 miles on the odometer and a persistent rattle in the engine that Noah couldn't afford to fix. The passenger seat was permanently stained from a coffee spill that happened 2 years ago, and the air conditioning had given up working sometime during the previous summer. But it ran, it was paid for, and it got him where he needed to go. In Noah's current world, those three things made it a luxury. His apartment in Brookfield Heights wasn't much to look at from the outside. The complex had been built in the 1970s, and it showed faded yellow siding, cracked concrete walkways, and a pool that had been empty for as long as anyone could remember. But Noah's unit, a one-bedroom on the second floor, was immaculate. He'd learned to take pride in what he could control, even when everything else felt like it was falling apart. The apartment told the story of a life interrupted. In the living room, a wedding photo still sat on the second-hand coffee table, Noah and Emma on their wedding day, both of them laughing at something the photographer had said. Next to it, a small framed certificate from the Metropolitan Insurance Academy, where Noah had completed his training to become an insurance adjuster. That had been the plan before everything changed. Stable work, good benefits, maybe even a house with a yard someday. Now the certificate served as a reminder of dreams deferred. The insurance industry had been hit hard by a series of natural disasters and economic downturns. Entry-level adjuster positions had been eliminated in favor of automated systems and outsourced call centers. Noah had spent 8 months applying for jobs that either didn't exist anymore or required experience he couldn't get without first having a job he couldn't find. That's how he'd ended up at Meridian Financial Tower, processing data entry for insurance claims that other people would evaluate. It wasn't what he'd trained for, but it paid $18.50 an hour, and in a world where bills didn't stop coming, $18.50 an hour was the difference between having a roof over his head and sleeping in his car. The crossing guard position at Pinehurst Elementary was unpaid, but Noah had never considered it charity work. After Emma's accident, he'd found himself drawn to the intersection near their old neighborhood, standing there during school hours and watching cars blow through stop signs with the kind of casual disregard that had cost him everything. One day, he'd simply started directing traffic. The school principal, Mrs. Chen, had noticed him after a week and asked if he'd like to make it official. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "We can't pay you," she'd explained apologetically. "The budget doesn't have room for another staff position, but if you're willing to volunteer, we'd love to have someone who actually cares about these kids' safety." Noah had said yes immediately. The kids didn't know his story, didn't know about Emma or the insurance money that had run out or the bills that kept coming. To them, he was just Mr. Noah, the man who made sure they got across the street safely, and for 2 hours every morning that was enough. The routine at Meridian Financial Tower had its own rhythm. Noah would arrive each evening as the day shift was winding down, passing the executives and managers as they headed to their cars in the covered parking section of the garage. They wore clothes that cost more than Noah made in a month, carried briefcases that probably contained more important documents than Noah would see in a year, and moved with the confident stride of people who knew their place in the world. Noah envied them, but he didn't resent them. Resentment was a luxury he couldn't afford, an emotion that required energy he needed to conserve for more important things, like staying awake during his shift or figuring out how to stretch his grocery budget until the next payday. His workspace on the 32nd floor was a cubicle identical to 20 others, each equipped with a computer, a phone, and a small desk lamp. The walls were generic beige, decorated with motivational posters that felt like mockery to someone working the night shift for survival wages. "Reach for the stars," proclaimed one poster featuring a mountain climber. "Success is a journey, not a destination," insisted another, showing a businessman walking confidently down a sunny path. But Noah had learned to find meaning in the small things. He took pride in his accuracy rate, 98.7%. Consistently higher than anyone else on the night shift. He organized his desk each morning before leaving, ensuring that everything was precisely where it should be. He learned the names of the security guards and the other cleaning staff, people who were just as invisible as he was, but who kept the building functioning while everyone else slept. The janitor who cleaned the 32nd floor was named Roger, though Noah had only learned this by reading the name embroidered on his shirt. Roger Roberts, according to the small text below the company logo. They'd exchanged polite nods for months, but had never actually spoken. Roger seemed to take the same pride in his work that Noah took in his own. Every surface gleamed, every trash bin was emptied precisely, every chair was returned to its proper position. Tonight, as Noah watched Roger work his way methodically through the cubicles, he noticed something different. Roger's movement seemed slower, more deliberate. He paused longer at each workstation, and when he thought no one was looking, he rubbed his lower back with the kind of grimace that spoke of chronic pain. Noah understood that grimace. His own back ached from 12 hours hunched over a computer, from sleeping on a mattress that had lost its support years ago, from the constant stress of living paycheck to paycheck. But watching Roger struggle with what was obviously physical pain while continuing to work with quiet dignity struck Noah in a way that surprised him. The turkey sandwich sat on Noah's desk, still wrapped in its white deli paper. He'd been looking forward to it all day, had even allowed himself to imagine savoring each bite. But as he watched Roger empty the trash bin next to his cubicle, moving with the careful precision of someone trying not to aggravate an injury, Noah found himself thinking about something Emma used to say. "The measure of a person isn't what they have," she'd told him once, watching him give his last $5 to a homeless veteran outside the grocery store. "It's what they do when they have the choice to help someone who has less." Noah looked at his sandwich, then at Roger, then back at his sandwich. Tomorrow was payday. He could survive on sardines for one more night. But Roger looked like a man who might not have eaten a decent meal in days. There were moments in Noah's life that divided everything into before and after, before Emma's death and after, before the insurance money ran out and after, before he learned that a man could work 40 hours a week and still not be able to afford groceries, and after. But the deepest division, the one that carved the deepest scar across his soul, was before he discovered what it truly meant to be invisible, and after. Noah Johnson hadn't always been the forgotten father of Meridian Financial Tower. 6 years ago, he'd been Noah Johnson, senior claims investigator at Premier Insurance Solutions, with a corner office on the 14th floor of the Westfield Business Center. He'd worn tailored suits, carried a leather briefcase that Emma had bought him for their 3rd anniversary, and had business cards with his name embossed in gold lettering. Back then, Noah's job was to investigate complex insurance claims, the kind that required intellect, intuition, and an understanding of human nature that couldn't be taught in any textbook. He was good at it, exceptionally good. He could look at a claim that others had written off as legitimate and spot the inconsistencies that revealed fraud. He could interview a claimant and know within 5 minutes whether they were telling the truth. His colleagues called him the human polygraph, and he'd been proud of that reputation. The work had meaning beyond the paycheck. Every fraudulent claim Noah uncovered meant that honest policyholders wouldn't have to absorb the cost through higher premiums. Every dollar he saved the company was a dollar that could go toward legitimate claims from people who genuinely needed help. It was work that mattered, work that made a difference. Emma had been proud of him. She would brag to her friends about her husband, the detective who solved cases that stumped everyone else. She'd attend company Christmas parties and beam when his supervisor would inevitably corner her to praise Noah's latest breakthrough. "Your husband is irreplaceable," Mr. Hartwell had told her at the last party they'd attended together. "We're going to build the fraud division around him." That was February. By August, Emma was gone. The drunk driver who killed her was 23 years old, driving a car registered to his father, insured by a company that fought the wrongful death claim for 18 months. 18 months of legal fees, of depositions, of lawyers who promised justice but delivered delays. When the settlement finally came, it barely covered the funeral expenses and the legal costs. The life insurance policy that was supposed to provide security had been reduced to a few $1,000s after outstanding debts were paid. But the real blow came 6 months after Emma's death, when Premier Insurance Solutions underwent a corporate restructuring. The human fraud investigators were expensive, the executives explained. New artificial intelligence systems could process claims faster and more efficiently. The entire department was eliminated overnight. Noah had 60 days to find a new position within the company. There were jobs available, data entry positions, Call center work, filing clerk roles that paid a fraction of his former salary, jobs that required no skill, no expertise, no recognition of the 15 years he'd devoted to building his career. It's temporary, his former supervisor had assured him, shaking Noah's hand in the parking lot after his final day. Once you get back on your feet, companies will be fighting over someone with your experience. That had been 3 years ago. The fighting had never materialized. The job market for fraud investigators had essentially disappeared. Insurance companies had embraced automation with evangelical fervor, convinced that algorithms could replace human intuition. The few positions that remained required certifications in new technologies that Noah couldn't afford to pursue, or demanded experience with software systems that hadn't existed when he was working in the field. He'd applied for hundreds of jobs, security positions, investigative roles, even basic office work, but there was always someone younger, someone cheaper, someone who didn't represent the old way of doing things. At 34, Noah had somehow become obsolete. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was now processing insurance claims, the same types of claims he'd once investigated for $18.50 an hour in the basement of a building owned by one of the companies that had rejected his employment application. He saw fraudulent claims every night, obvious cases that any competent investigator would catch in minutes. But his job was data entry, not analysis. His role was to input information, not to think. He'd tried to mention irregularities he noticed to his supervisor, a 26-year-old named Kevin, who'd graduated from business school with an MBA and theories about efficiency optimization. Kevin had listened politely, then explained that Noah's observations would be noted for future consideration, which was corporate speak for mind your own business and do what you're paid to do. The apartment in Brookfield Heights was a far cry from the house he and Emma had shared in Meadowbrook Estates. That house had been their dream home. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, a yard where they'd planned to plant a garden and maybe build a swing set someday. They'd saved for 5 years to afford the down payment, had celebrated when their offer was accepted, had spent weekends at Home Depot planning improvements. After Emma died, Noah had tried to keep the house. It had been their sanctuary, filled with memories of lazy Sunday mornings and dinner parties with friends. But the mortgage payments that had been manageable on 2 incomes became impossible. On unemployment benefits, and then on the poverty wages of night shift data entry. He'd lost the house 8 months after Emma's funeral. Not to foreclosure. Noah's pride wouldn't allow that. He'd sold it before the bank could take it, using the small amount of equity to pay off debts and buy himself a few months of breathing room. The house sold to a young couple who reminded him painfully of himself and Emma 6 years earlier, full of hope and plans for the future. Now, Noah's entire life fit into a 1-bedroom apartment that cost $850 a month, including utilities. His furniture was a mix of pieces he'd salvaged from the old house and items he'd found at thrift stores. The wedding photo on the coffee table was the same one that had sat on the mantel in Meadowbrook Estates, but everything around it was different. The crossing guard job had started as grief therapy, though Noah had never thought of it that way. After the accident, he'd found himself driving past the intersection where Emma had died, sitting in his car and watching the traffic light cycle from red to green to yellow. He'd noticed how many drivers ran the light, how pedestrians hurried across without looking, how easily another tragedy could happen. One morning, he'd simply gotten out of his car and started directing traffic, not officially, just standing at the corner and making sure people saw each other. A police officer had stopped to ask what he was doing, and Noah had explained about Emma, about the accident, about wanting to prevent it from happening to someone. Else, the officer had nodded and driven away without giving him a ticket or telling him to leave. The next week, Noah had been there again, and the week after that, Mrs. Chen, the principal at Pinehurst Elementary, had been the one to suggest he become an official volunteer. The school was located 3 blocks from the intersection where Emma had died, and many of the students had to cross busy streets on their way to class. The budget didn't allow for a paid crossing guard, but if Noah was willing to volunteer, it wasn't about the money. Noah would have done it for free anyway. But having an official role, a purpose, a reason to get up each morning after 4 hours of exhausted sleep had given him something he hadn't realized he was missing, a sense that his life still had meaning. The kids at Pinehurst didn't know they were part of Noah's healing process. To them, he was just Mr. Noah, the nice man who helped them cross the street and remembered their names and asked about their school projects. They had no idea that their smiles and waves were sometimes the only bright spots in his entire day. As Noah sat at his desk in Meridian Financial Tower, watching Roger Roberts methodically clean the office spaces around him, he thought about the strange turns his life had taken, from fraud investigator to data entry clerk, from homeowner to renter, from someone who caught lies for a living to someone whose own truth had become too painful to share. But as he watched Roger pause again to rub his back, Noah realized that some truths transcended circumstances. Emma's voice echoed in his memory. The measure of a person isn't what they have. It's what they do when they have the choice to help someone who has less. Noah unwrapped his turkey sandwich and stood up. 5 floors above Noah's data entry cubicle, in a corner office that commanded a panoramic view of the city skyline, sat a woman who had built her life around the art of being underestimated. Madeline Rivera had learned early that being a woman in the investment world meant fighting twice as hard for half the recognition, so she'd made herself indispensable in ways that couldn't be ignored or dismissed. At 42, Madeline was the chief financial officer of Meridian Financial Tower, a position she'd clawed her way into through 15 years of 80-hour weeks, missed family dinners, and a ruthless competence that had earned her the grudging respect of men who would have preferred to keep her in a supporting role forever. Her office walls were lined with awards, certifications, and photographs of her shaking hands with governors, senators, and Fortune 500 CEOs. But tonight, as she sat behind her mahogany desk reviewing quarterly reports that would determine the fate of hundreds of employees, Madeline felt the familiar weight of isolation that success had brought her. The higher she climbed, the smaller her world became. The fewer people she could trust, the more decisions she had to make alone. Madeline had grown up in East Hartford, the daughter of a single mother who cleaned offices to pay the rent on their one-bedroom apartment. Maria Rivera had worked 3 jobs: morning shift at a hospital, afternoon shift at a law firm, and weekend shifts at office buildings throughout the city. Madeline had spent countless hours as a child sitting in empty offices while her mother vacuumed carpets and emptied trash bins, watching her work with a dignity that poverty couldn't diminish. Mija, her mother used to say, speaking Spanish in the safety of empty buildings where no one could judge her accent. Education is the only thing they can't take away from you. Learn everything you can, and someday you'll be the one sitting behind these desks instead of cleaning them. Maria Rivera had died when Madeline was 26, just 3 months after Madeline landed her first real job as a junior analyst at a small investment firm. She'd worked herself to death, literally, a heart attack at 52, brought on by decades of stress, overwork, and the kind of chronic exhaustion that comes from never having enough money to rest. Madeline had used her mother's life insurance, money to put herself through graduate school, earning an MBA while working full-time and sleeping 4 hours a night. She'd graduated summa cum laude, landed a position at a prestigious firm, and spent the next 15 years proving that Maria Rivera's daughter belonged in boardrooms and corner offices. The success had come at a cost. Madeline's marriage had ended 5 years ago, a casualty of her devotion to work and her ex-husband's inability to understand why she couldn't simply be satisfied with enough. She'd bought him out of their suburban home and moved to a penthouse, Apartment that was beautiful, expensive, and achingly empty. She had no close friends. Friendship required vulnerability, and vulnerability was a luxury Madeline couldn't afford in a world where showing weakness meant losing ground. She had colleagues, subordinates, and business contacts, but no one who really knew her. No one who remembered that she'd once been Magdalena Rivera, a little girl who did her homework in office buildings and dreamed of someday having a desk of her own. The irony of her position at Meridian Financial Tower wasn't lost on her. The building employed hundreds of cleaning staff, security guards, and maintenance workers, people who reminded her of her mother. But Madeline rarely saw them. They worked different hours, moved in different circles, existed in a parallel world that kept the building functioning while remaining invisible to the executives who benefited from their labor. Tonight was different, though. Madeline had stayed late to finalize the budget for the next fiscal year, a document that would determine everything from executive bonuses to staffing levels for the overnight cruise. The building was quieter than usual, the executive floors nearly empty except for security guards and the occasional night shift supervisor. As she worked, Madeline found herself thinking about the budget line items that would affect the invisible workforce. The cleaning contracts were up for renewal, and the facilities management company was pushing for reduced staffing levels and lower wages. The security budget was being scrutinized for efficiency opportunities. The maintenance staff was being evaluated for potential outsourcing. These weren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. They were decisions that would affect real people, families, lives. But in the sterile language of corporate budgeting, human impact was reduced to cost optimization and resource allocation. Madeline's assistant had left a stack of personnel files on her desk, background checks and employment records for the overnight staff, required reading before the budget meeting tomorrow. She'd been avoiding them all week, but now, in the quiet of the empty building, she opened the first file. The name at the top caught her attention. Noah Johnson, Data Entry Specialist, Night Shift. The photograph clipped to the inside cover showed a man who looked tired, but maintained a quiet dignity. His employment record was spotless, perfect attendance, high accuracy rates, no disciplinary actions. But what struck Madeline was his previous employment history. Senior claims investigator at Premier Insurance Solutions, 15 years of experience, glowing performance reviews, recommendations from supervisors who praised his integrity, his analytical skills, his ability to solve complex cases that stumped other investigators. Madeline frowned. What was a senior investigator doing in a data entry position? She flipped through the file, looking for an explanation. The timeline told the story. Premier Insurance had eliminated their fraud investigation department 3 years ago. Noah had been unemployed for 8 months before taking the night shift position at Meridian. She opened another file. Roger Roberts, Custodial Services, Night Shift. The photograph showed an older man with kind eyes and graying hair. His work history was extensive. 12 years as head of facilities management at Thornfield Corporation. 5 years as a maintenance supervisor at Global Dynamics, 3 years as a building operations manager at Sterling Industries. Again, Madeline found herself puzzled. Why was someone with management experience working as a janitor? She read further. Thornfield Corporation had gone bankrupt 4 years ago. Global Dynamics had outsourced their facilities management. Sterling Industries had been acquired and dissolved. Roger Roberts had been unemployed for 2 years before taking the custodial position. File after file told similar stories. Former professionals, skilled workers, people with experience and expertise who had been displaced by corporate restructuring, technological changes, economic downturns. They'd taken whatever work they could find to survive, accepting positions far below their qualifications because dignity mattered less than paying rent. Madeline set the files aside and walked to her office window. The city stretched out below her, millions of lights representing millions of lives. How many of those lives had been disrupted by decisions made in offices like hers? How many qualified people were working jobs beneath their abilities because the economy had no place for their skills? She thought about her mother, about the offices Maria Rivera had cleaned, while dreaming of something better for her daughter. Madeline had achieved that dream, had climbed higher than her mother could have imagined. But in reaching the top, had she lost sight of the people still climbing? Her phone buzzed with a text message from her executive assistant. Budget meeting moved to 7 a.m. Board wants final recommendations by noon. 7 hours to decide the fate of people like Noah Johnson and Roger Roberts. 7 hours to choose between profit margins and human dignity. 7 hours to determine whether Meridian Financial Tower would continue to provide work for displaced professionals or join the ranks of companies that valued efficiency over people. Madeline looked at the personnel files scattered across her desk. Each one represented someone's mother, father, sibling, someone's entire world, balanced on the decisions she would make in the morning. The weight of that responsibility was crushing, but it was also clarifying. She'd built her career on being underestimated, on proving that she belonged in rooms where others thought she didn't fit. Maybe it was time to use that position to advocate for people who couldn't advocate for themselves. Madeline gathered the files and settled back at her desk. She had 7 hours to craft a budget that would protect the invisible workforce of Meridian Financial Tower. 7 hours to honor her mother's memory and the dreams that had brought her to this office. But first, she wanted to see these people for herself, not as line items in a budget, but as human beings doing their jobs with the same dignity her mother had shown every day of her working life. She locked her office and headed for the elevator. It was time to meet the night shift. As the elevator descended through the floors of the building she helped run, Madeline thought about the strange paths that had brought them all here. A former fraud investigator processing insurance claims, a former facilities manager cleaning offices, a girl from East Hartford making decisions that would affect hundreds of lives. The elevator stopped at the 32nd floor, and Madeline stepped out into a world she'd never really seen before. The fluorescent lights were dimmer here, the carpet older, the furniture more utilitarian. This was where the real work happened, where data was processed and claims were handled, and the daily operations of the company were maintained by people who would never see the inside of an executive conference room. She walked quietly through the rows of cubicles, observing the night shift workers who kept Meridian Financial Tower running while the executives slept. They moved with purpose and professionalism, treating their work with respect, even when their work didn't always respect them in return. And then she saw something that stopped her in her tracks. In the corner cubicle, a man was standing up from his desk, holding what appeared to be a sandwich wrapped in white paper. He was walking toward the janitor, who was working his way through the row of workstations. The same janitor whose file she'd just reviewed. Noah Johnson was approaching Roger Roberts, and in his hands was what looked like his lunch. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead like mechanical insects as Noah approached Roger Roberts with his turkey sandwich. The building felt different at this hour, quieter, more intimate, as if the corporate facade had been stripped away to reveal something more human underneath. Somewhere in the distance, an elevator dinged softly, but Noah barely noticed. His attention was focused entirely on the man in front of him. Roger had paused his cleaning routine and was standing beside a cubicle, one hand resting on his lower back, the other gripping the handle of his cart. Up close, Noah could see the details that distance had hidden. The careful way Roger favored his left leg, the slight tremor in his hands that spoke of exhaustion, the way his uniform hung loose on a frame that had clearly lost weight recently. "Excuse me," Noah said softly, not wanting to startle him. Roger turned, and Noah saw something flicker across his face. Not surprise exactly, but a kind of cautious curiosity. In all the months they'd worked the same shift, they'd never spoken beyond polite nods. Roger's eyes moved from Noah's face to the sandwich in his hands, and Noah caught a glimpse of something that made his chest tighten. Hunger, quickly masked, but unmistakable. "I'm Noah," he said, extending his free hand. "Noah Johnson. I work over there in data entry." Roger's grip was firm despite the tremor, his palm calloused from years of physical work. "Roger Roberts," he replied, his voice rough from disuse. "Nice to finally meet you properly." There was something in Roger's tone that suggested education, refinement, a hint that this man's story was more complex than his current circumstances. Might suggest Noah had heard it before in his own voice, the echo of who you used to be when the world still valued what you had to offer. "I was wondering," Noah began, then stopped. "How do you offer someone your lunch without making them feel like charity? How do you acknowledge another person's dignity while recognizing their need?" Emma had always known how to navigate these moments with grace, but Noah felt clumsy, uncertain. He started again. "I ordered this sandwich from Morrison's Market, but when I opened it, they got my order wrong. Turkey instead of ham." The lie came easily, smoothly, a small kindness wrapped in plausible deniability. "I don't really like turkey, and I hate to see good food go to waste. I was wondering if you might want it." Roger's eyes sharpened, and for a moment Noah thought he might refuse. There was pride there, the same stubborn dignity that Noah recognized in himself. But then Roger's stomach growled audibly in the quiet office space, and something in his expression softened. "That's very kind of you," Roger said carefully. "Are you sure you don't want it?" "Positive," Noah replied. "I've got some crackers in my desk drawer. That'll hold me until I get home." Roger accepted the sandwich with the gravity of someone receiving communion. He unwrapped it slowly, and Noah saw his eyes close briefly at the smell of fresh bread and real turkey. When was the last time this man had eaten a decent meal? "Thank you," Roger said, and there was something in those two words that carried the weight of genuine gratitude, the kind that comes from unexpected kindness in dark times. "We've got to look out for each other, right?" Noah said, trying to keep his tone light. "We're the only ones here who understand what the night shift is really like." Roger smiled, the first real smile Noah had seen from him, and nodded. "The forgotten people," he said, "the ones who keep the world running while everyone else sleeps." What Noah didn't know was that 30 feet away, standing in the shadow of a support column, Madeline Rivera was watching the entire exchange with an expression of growing amazement. She had come down to the 32nd floor to observe her employees, to put faces to the budget line items she would have to defend in a few hours. She hadn't expected to witness something that would fundamentally change her understanding of the people who worked in her building. Madeline had been raised to notice things, to read between the lines, to see what others missed. Her mother had taught her that survival depended on understanding the unspoken truths that governed the world around them. And what she was seeing now was a masterclass in human decency. Noah Johnson, according to his file, made $18.50 an hour and lived in a low-income apartment complex. His personnel record showed no disciplinary actions, but it also showed no raises, no promotions, no recognition beyond the basic acknowledgement of his competence. He was invisible to the corporate structure, a cog in the machine who processed insurance claims and went home to a life that the executives in the upper floors would never think about. And yet here he was, giving away what was probably his only decent meal of the week to someone he perceived as having even less than he did. Roger Roberts, the former facilities manager who'd been reduced to custodial work, accepted the sandwich with the dignity of a man who understood both generosity and necessity. Madeline could see the hunger in his posture, the careful way he held the food as if it were precious. She could also see the intelligence in his eyes, the competence in his movements despite his obvious fatigue. These weren't just budget line items. These were skilled professionals who had been discarded by a system that valued quarterly profits over human worth. And instead of becoming bitter or resentful, they were taking care of each other. As Madeline watched Noah return to his desk and begin eating crackers that were clearly his real dinner, not a backup snack, she felt something crack, open inside her chest. This was what her mother had meant when she talked about dignity. This was what Maria Rivera had shown every day of her working life. The grace that came from recognizing the humanity in everyone around you, regardless of their circumstances. The budget meeting was in 6 hours. In 6 hours, Madeline would have to present her recommendations to a board of directors who cared more about shareholder returns than employee welfare. She would have to justify every dollar spent on human resources, every contract that put people over profits. But first, she needed to understand exactly who she was fighting for. Madeline stepped out of the shadows and walked toward Noah's cubicle. Her heels clicked softly on the carpet, and both men looked up as she approached. She saw surprise flicker across their faces. What was a C-suite executive doing on the 32nd floor at midnight? "Excuse me," she said, her voice gentler than either man had ever heard from someone in her position. "I'm Madeline Rivera, Chief Financial Officer. I was wondering if I could speak with both of you for a moment." Noah's face went pale. CFOs didn't make social calls to data entry clerks at midnight. In his experience, unexpected visits from executives meant only one thing: layoffs. He glanced at Roger, who had gone very still, the sandwich forgotten in his hands. "Is something wrong?" Noah asked, his voice carefully neutral. Madeline shook her head. "No, nothing's wrong. I'm actually here because I wanted to understand something better." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I just witnessed something that I think says a lot about the kind of people who work for this company. I was hoping you might help me understand what I should do with that information." The three of them stood in the quiet cubicle, surrounded by the hum of computers and the distant sounds of the building's mechanical systems. Outside the windows, the city sparkled with its midnight energy, but inside this small space, something more important was happening. Something that would change all of their lives forever. But none of them knew it yet. All they knew was that, for the first time in a long time, someone with power was asking them what they thought. Someone with influence was treating them like people whose opinions mattered. And tomorrow morning, 12 lawyers would arrive at Noah's apartment with news that would rewrite the story of his life. But tonight, in the quiet space between corporate floors and human hearts, 3 people were about to discover that kindness, once witnessed, demands a response. Roger took a small bite of his sandwich, savoring it slowly. Noah opened a packet of crackers from his desk drawer, and Madeline Rivera began to understand what her mother had been trying to teach her all those years ago about the difference between having power and using it wisely. The crisis had begun not with conflict, but with connection, and the resolution would require something none of them expected: the courage to believe that one person's kindness could change everything. Madeline Rivera had conducted thousands of meetings in her 15-year career, but none had felt quite like this. Standing in a dimly lit cubicle at midnight, facing 2 men who had every reason to distrust corporate executives, she found herself searching for words that had never appeared in any business school textbook. "What I just witnessed," she began, carefully, "was something I haven't seen in a boardroom in 20 years, and I've been thinking that maybe that's exactly the problem." Noah shifted uncomfortably in his chair, the packet of crackers forgotten in his hands. "I'm not sure I understand, Ms. Rivera." "Call me Madeline," she said. And even as the words left her mouth, she realized how long it had been since she'd asked anyone to use her first name in a professional setting. And what I mean is this: I just watched you give away what was probably your dinner to someone you thought needed it more than you did. That's not something you can teach. That's not something you can put in a training manual or measure with performance metrics. Roger had stopped eating, the sandwich held carefully in his hands. His eyes were sharp, cautious. With respect, Mum, are we in some kind of trouble? Madeline shook her head. No, you're not in trouble, but I am. She paused, trying to find a way to explain the weight of what tomorrow's budget meeting meant without violating confidentiality protocols. In 6 hours, I have to present a budget to the board of directors that will determine the employment status of everyone on the night shift. And 30 minutes ago, I was looking at you both as line items on a spreadsheet. The silence that followed was heavy with implication. Noah's face went pale when Roger set his sandwich down on the desk with the careful precision of someone trying not to show fear. The contracts are up for review, Noah said quietly. It wasn't a question. Yes, Madeline confirmed. And the recommendations from the facilities management company are what you'd expect. Reduce staff, outsource services, optimize costs. All the corporate buzzwords that sound reasonable in a conference room and devastating in real life. She pulled a chair from an adjacent cubicle and sat down, a gesture that immediately changed the dynamic from interrogation to conversation. But here's what I realized while I was reading your personnel files tonight. This company has been hiring overqualified people for entry-level positions because qualified people are desperate for any work at all. We've been getting senior-level experience for junior-level wages, and we've been calling it good business. Madeline opened the folder she'd been carrying and spread the personnel files on Noah's desk. Noah Johnson, Senior Claims Investigator, with 15 years of experience, now processing data entry for $18.50 an hour. Roger Roberts, former facilities manager with 20 years of experience, now working custodial services for minimum wage. She looked directly at Noah. Your accuracy rate is 98.7%. The industry standard for data entry is 94%. Your former supervisor at Premier Insurance called you irreplaceable in his recommendation letter. Then she turned to Roger. Your maintenance requests get resolved faster than anyone else's. You've identified and prevented 3 potential safety violations that could have resulted in lawsuits. Your former employer listed you as the most competent facilities professional we've ever employed. Noah found his voice first. If you know all that, then why are we here? Why are you talking to us instead of just making whatever decision you're going to make? Madeline leaned forward. Because I need to understand something. You both had successful careers. You both lost them through no fault of your own. You both ended up here, taking jobs that don't use your skills or experience. And instead of being angry or resentful, you're taking care of each other. She gestured toward the sandwich. Noah, you just gave away your dinner to someone you thought needed it more. Roger, you accepted it with grace instead of pride. That tells me more about your character than any performance review ever could. Roger picked up his sandwich again, but he didn't take a bite. What exactly are you asking us? I'm asking you to help me understand how to be the kind of leader who deserves employees like you. Madeline's voice was steady, but there was something vulnerable in it. My mother cleaned offices for 30 years. She worked herself to death trying to give me opportunities she never had. I climbed my way into this office by being smarter, tougher, and more ruthless than anyone expected. She paused, looking around the cubicle that was so different from her executive suite. But I think I lost something along the way. I think I forgot that the numbers on my spreadsheets represent real people with real lives and real worth. Noah set down his crackers and really looked at her for the first time. You could have just reviewed the budget and made your recommendations without ever coming down here. I could have, Madeline agreed, but my mother didn't raise me to make decisions about people without looking them in the eye. There was something in the way she said it that reminded both men of their own losses, their own connections to people who had shaped their understanding of right and wrong. Noah thought of Emma. Roger thought of his wife Sarah, who had died 2 years ago, just before he lost his job at Sterling Industries. So what happens now? Roger asked. Madeline stood up and gathered the personnel files. Now I go back upstairs and figure out how to convince a board of directors that human decency is a better investment strategy than cost optimization. She paused at the edge of the cubicle. But I want you both to know something. Whatever happens, in that meeting, what I saw here tonight mattered. It reminded me why I started this career in the first place, and it gave me something I haven't had in a long time. What's that? Noah asked. A reason to fight that has nothing to do with profit. Margins! Margins! As Madeline walked back toward the elevator, Noah and Roger sat in silence for a long moment. The building felt different now, charged with possibility and uncertainty in equal measure. Do you think she meant it? Roger asked finally. Noah thought about the vulnerability he'd heard in her voice, the way she'd sat down instead of standing over them, the fact that she'd bothered to learn their names and their stories. I think she did. Roger took another bite of his sandwich, chewing thoughtfully. What do you think our chances are? Better than they were an hour ago, Noah replied, but probably not great. They both understood the reality of corporate decision-making. Budget meetings were about numbers, not narratives. Board members were accountable to shareholders, not to night shift workers whose names they would never know. But something had shifted in the dynamic of Meridian Financial Tower tonight. A CFO had left her office to meet the people whose jobs hung in the balance. A data entry clerk had sacrificed his dinner for a janitor. A former facilities manager had accepted kindness without losing his dignity. And somewhere in the chemistry of those interactions, something had been set in motion that none of them could fully understand yet. As the night wore on, Noah returned to his insurance claims and Roger resumed his cleaning rounds. But they worked with a different energy now, a sense that they had been seen and acknowledged by someone who had the power to make a difference. Madeline Rivera rode the elevator back to the executive floors, carrying with her a new understanding of the people who worked in her building. She had 5 hours to prepare for the most important presentation of her career, not because it would determine her success, but because it would determine the lives of people who had shown her what success really meant. In her penthouse office, surrounded by awards and certificates and photographs with powerful people, Madeline began to craft an argument for the radical proposition that treating employees like human beings might actually be good for business. She had no way of knowing that her decision to defend the night shift would trigger a series of events that would transform not just their lives, but the entire culture of Meridian Financial Tower. All she knew was that her mother would have been proud of the fight she was about to pick, and for the first time in years, that felt like enough. 2:30 a.m., the building had settled into its deepest quiet. The hum of computers and the distant whisper of the ventilation system created a white noise that seemed to encourage confession, the kind of honesty that only emerges in the small hours when the world feels safely asleep. Noah had tried to return to his work, but concentration eluded him. The conversation with Madeline Rivera had shaken something loose inside him, stirred up feelings he'd spent 3 years carefully burying. He found himself staring at the insurance claim on his screen, a water damage case from a family in Ohio whose basement had flooded, and seeing not just data points, but real people dealing with real loss. He was still processing the surreal reality that the CFO of the company knew his name. had read his personnel file and had promised to fight for his job when he heard soft footsteps approaching his cubicle. "I finished my rounds early," Roger said, settling into the chair next to Noah's desk. "Thought you might want some company." Noah looked up, grateful for the interruption. "How are you feeling about all this?" Roger was quiet for a moment, unwrapping the last portion of the turkey sandwich and taking a small, deliberate bite. "Hopeful," he said finally, "which scares me more than being pessimistic ever did." "I know what you mean," Noah replied. "Hope is dangerous when you can't afford to be disappointed." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, two men who understood the weight of starting over in middle age, of having to rebuild identity and purpose from the ground up. Finally, Roger spoke. "You know, I used to manage a team of 37 people," he said, his voice carrying the weight of memory. "Had an office with windows, a secretary who brought me coffee in the morning, meetings that actually mattered. I thought I had it all figured out." Noah turned his chair to face Roger, fully. "What happened?" "Thornfield Corporation got bought out by a private equity firm," Roger said, staring out the window at the city lights. "New owners came in with efficiency experts and consultants with clipboards, spent 6 months analyzing our operations, then eliminated my entire department in a single day." He paused, taking another bite of sandwich. 23 years with the company. I started in the mailroom when I was 19, worked my way up through maintenance, operations, facilities management. I knew that building better than anyone, every pipe, every circuit, every corner that needed special attention. "Did they keep anyone from your team?" Noah asked. 3 people, Roger said bitterly. "They outsourced everything else to a company that charged half as much and knew nothing about our systems. Last I heard, they've had 6 major maintenance failures in the past 2 years, but the quarterly reports look good, so the stockholders are happy." Noah nodded, recognizing the story. Premier Insurance did something similar. They brought in these AI systems that were supposed to revolutionize fraud detection. Faster processing, lower costs, fewer human errors. The computers could analyze a claim in 30 seconds instead of the 3 hours it took me. "But?" Roger prompted. "But computers can't smell a lie," Noah said. "They can't read body language during an interview or notice when someone's story changes in subtle ways between phone calls. They can't understand that sometimes what looks like fraud is just desperation, or that sometimes legitimate claims have inconsistencies because people in crisis don't always remember details perfectly." Noah pulled up a claim on his computer screen, pointing to the data fields. "See this case, 73-year-old woman in Miami, house fire, claiming replacement costs for her jewelry collection. The AI flagged it as suspicious because the estimated value seemed high for someone in her neighborhood." "And?" Roger asked. "I would have talked to her," Noah said. "I would have learned that she'd been a seamstress for 50 years, that every piece of jewelry was handmade, that the collection represented a lifetime of her own craftsmanship. The AI saw numbers that didn't fit a pattern. I would have seen a person whose life's work had gone up in smoke." Roger was quiet, processing the implications. "Do you think they know? The people making these decisions, do you think they understand what they're destroying?" Before Noah could answer, they heard the soft ding of the elevator, followed by footsteps approaching their section. Madeline Rivera appeared at the edge of Noah's cubicle, carrying a tray with 3 cups of coffee and a box of pastries from the executive break room. "I thought you might want some decent coffee," she said, setting the tray down on Noah's desk. "And I realized I never ate dinner, so I figured none of us had." The gesture was simple, but it spoke volumes. CFOs didn't typically bring coffee to night shift workers. They certainly didn't admit to missing meals or suggest shared experiences with employees 40 levels below them on the corporate hierarchy. "Thank you," Roger said, accepting a cup with obvious appreciation. "This is very kind." Madeline took the remaining chair and settled in with her own coffee. "I've been thinking about what you both said earlier, about how you ended up here. And I keep coming back to something my mother used to tell me." She wrapped her hands around the coffee cup, using it as much for comfort as warmth. "She used to clean offices in buildings like this, worked nights so she could take care of me during the day, and she would come home with stories about the executives, the important meetings, the decisions being made in conference rooms." Madeline paused, looking directly at both men. "But she also told me about the janitors and security guards and maintenance workers who kept those buildings running. She said the people at the top never seemed to understand that their success depended entirely on the people they never noticed." "Sounds like a wise woman," Noah said. "She was," Madeline agreed. "She died of a heart attack when I was 26. The doctor said it was brought on by stress and overwork. 3 jobs, no health insurance, constant worry about money. She literally worked herself to death so I could have opportunities she never had." The 3 of them sat in silence, each processing the weight of that revelation. Roger was the first to speak. "Is that why you became a CFO? To make sure other people didn't have to live like that?" Madeline laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I became a CFO because I was angry and ambitious, and I wanted to prove that Maria Rivera's daughter could sit at any table she wanted. But somewhere along the way, I lost track of why that mattered." She gestured around the cubicle, taking in the modest workspace, the dimmed lights, the obvious signs of people making do with less. "Until tonight. Tonight reminded me that every decision I make affects real people with real lives. People like my mother, people like you." Noah leaned forward. "What changed your mind?" "About coming down here, I mean." Madeline considered the question carefully. "I was reading your personnel files, trying to prepare for the budget meeting, and I kept seeing the same pattern: overqualified people in entry-level positions, former professionals doing survival jobs. It reminded me that the invisible workforce isn't invisible because they're unimportant. They're invisible because the system benefits from not seeing them. Not seeing them." She took a sip of coffee, organizing her thoughts. "But then I watched Noah give you his sandwich, Roger. And I realized that in all my years of business school and executive training, no one ever taught me to recognize the kind of character that makes someone sacrifice their own dinner for a colleague they barely know." Roger set down his coffee cup. "You really think you can convince the board to keep us?" "I think I can convince them that cutting the night shift would be the stupidest business decision they could make," Madeline said firmly. "Not because it's the right thing to do, though it is, but because you're providing senior-level expertise. For entry-level wages, and replacing you would cost 3 times as much." She opened her laptop and turned it toward them. "I've been running the numbers. Noah, if they hired a consulting firm to provide fraud analysis services equivalent to what you catch during your data entry work, it would cost $180,000 a year. They're paying you $38,000. She scrolled to another spreadsheet. "Roger, outsourcing facilities management to a professional firm would cost $340,000 annually. Your salary is $32,000, and you're preventing maintenance issues that would cost hundreds of thousands to fix." Noah stared at the numbers. "You think they'll listen to that argument?" "I think they'll listen to anything that makes them more money," Madeline said pragmatically. "And the fact that it also happens to be morally right is just a bonus." As the night wore on, the 3 of them found themselves sharing stories they hadn't told anyone in years. Roger talked about his wife Sarah, how they'd planned to travel after his retirement, how her death from cancer had coincided with his job loss, leaving him with nothing but empty rooms and empty days. Noah spoke about Emma, about the crossing guard job that helped him feel useful, about the guilt he carried for not being able to provide the life he'd promised her when they were young and optimistic. Madeline told them about the loneliness of success, about the penthouse apartment that echoed with silence, about the relationships she'd sacrificed for career advancement that now felt hollow. And in that sharing, something unexpected happened. 3 people from completely different worlds discovered that loss was a universal language, that resilience looked the same whether you were climbing the corporate ladder or struggling to pay rent. By 4 a.m., they had become something none of them expected. Friends. Not colleagues, not business associates, but actual friends who understood each other's stories and cared about each other's futures. And that friendship would prove to be the foundation for everything that came next. The 3 hours between 4 a.m. and 7 a.m. transformed the 32nd floor of Meridian Financial Tower into something unprecedented, a war room where a CFO, a data entry clerk, and a janitor worked together to save not just jobs, but the soul of an entire organization. Madeline had moved her laptop to Noah's desk, and the 3 of them huddled around the screen like conspirators planning a revolution. In a way, that's exactly what they were doing. The board meets in 3 hours, Madeline said, pulling up presentation slides she'd been working on. I need to make a case that's bulletproof from both a financial and operational standpoint. Noah studied the spreadsheet she'd created. These numbers are impressive, but they're also theoretical. The board is going to want concrete examples. That's where you come in, Madeline said, turning to face him. I need you to walk me through specific cases where your expertise caught things that automated systems would have missed. Real cases, real dollar amounts. For the next hour, Noah became a teacher again. He pulled up claim after claim from his database, explaining the subtle patterns that indicated fraud, the inconsistencies that revealed coached testimony, the red flags that only human intuition could detect. This one, he said, highlighting a homeowner's claim from 6 months ago. Electrical fire, $340,000 in damages. The AI approved it automatically because all the documentation looked legitimate, but something bothered me about the timeline. Madeline leaned in. What kind of timeline issue? The claimant said the fire started at 2 a.m., but his neighbor's security camera showed him leaving the house at 1:45 a.m. with a suitcase. He claimed he was going to an all-night diner because he couldn't sleep. But the diner he mentioned doesn't open until 6 a.m. Roger whistled softly. How did you catch that? I called the diner, Noah said simply. The AI doesn't make phone calls. It just processes the paperwork. Madeline added the case to her presentation. What was the outcome? Fraud investigation, charges filed, $340,000 saved, plus whatever his future claims would have cost, Noah replied. But according to my job description, I wasn't supposed to investigate anything. I was just supposed to input the data. How many cases like this have you identified? Madeline asked. Noah pulled up a folder on his computer. 47 in the past year, total savings of approximately $2.3 million. The number hung in the air like a revelation. Madeline stared at the screen, then at Noah, then back at the screen. You've saved this company $2.3 million, and they're paying you $38,000 a year? Officially, I haven't saved them anything, Noah said quietly. I just input data. The fraud prevention is extracurricular. Madeline turned to Roger. What about you? What are you doing that goes beyond your job description? Roger seemed uncomfortable with the attention. It's not that big a deal. I just notice things. What kind of things? Madeline pressed. Well, there was the water leak on the 15th floor last month. Facilities management was going to wait until Monday to fix it, but I could tell from the staining pattern that it was getting worse. I came in on my day off and rerouted the water flow to prevent flooding. Noah looked up from his computer. How much would flooding have cost? The 15th floor houses the data center, Roger said. If those servers had gone down, he shrugged, Millions, probably, maybe tens of millions. Madeline made another note. What else? The heating system in the North Wing has been running inefficiently for 6 months, Roger continued. The maintenance company keeps saying it's fine, but I can hear that it's working too hard. I've been adjusting the settings manually each night to prevent overload, and if it fails, complete replacement would be about $800,000, Roger said. But if I can keep it running efficiently until the scheduled replacement next year, it'll save maybe $200,000 in emergency repairs and energy costs. Madeline shook her head in amazement. So let me get this straight. The company is paying you minimum wage to empty trash cans, but you're actually functioning as an unpaid facilities consultant, preventing millions in damages. I just like things to work properly, Roger said, embarrassed by the attention. As the sky began to lighten outside the windows, their collaborative effort took on an urgency that felt almost sacred. They weren't just preparing a presentation, they were crafting a manifesto about the value of human expertise, the importance of treating employees as whole people rather than interchangeable parts. Madeline found herself sharing details about the company's operations that she'd never discussed with anyone outside the C-suite. Noah and Roger, in turn, revealed insights about the building's daily functions that no executive had ever bothered to learn. The night security guard, Frank Kelly, Roger said at one point, he's been here for 8 years, knows every person who belongs in this building and everyone who doesn't. But the cost-cutting proposal wants to replace him with automated card readers and cameras. What's wrong with that? Madeline asked. Frank caught an attempted break-in 3 months ago, Noah said. Guy had legitimate credentials, valid keycard, a proper ID, but Frank knew something was off because he was carrying a briefcase to a floor that never generates paperwork. Turned out to be corporate espionage, Roger added. Former employee trying to steal client data for a competitor. The cameras would have recorded him, but they wouldn't have stopped him. Madeline added Frank Kelly's story to the growing presentation. How many other people like this are we talking about? The entire night shift, Noah said. 37 people who know this building, this company, these operations better than any consultant or automated system ever will. As 6 a.m. approached, Madeline's presentation had evolved into something unprecedented in corporate America. A business case that valued human insight over algorithmic efficiency, that measured success in relationships rather than just revenue. But more than that, the process of creating it had changed all 3 of them in ways they were only beginning to understand. Noah had spent 3 years believing his expertise was worthless, that his experience had been made obsolete by technological progress. Working with Madeline to document his contributions, he began to see himself not as a failed professional, but as someone whose skills were being criminally underutilized. Roger had accepted his demotion from management to maintenance as the natural consequence of economic forces beyond his control. But explaining his daily observations to people who understood their value, he started to remember what it felt like to be respected for his competence. Madeline had built her career on the assumption that business success required emotional distance, that effective leadership meant making decisions based on data rather than sentiment. But spending the night with Noah and Roger, she discovered that the most valuable insights came from people who cared enough to notice details that spreadsheets couldn't capture. At 6:30 a.m., as the first day shift employees began arriving, Madeline gathered her materials and prepared to return to the executive floors. But before she left, she did something that surprised even her. She hugged them both. Not a professional handshake or a polite nod, but actual hugs, the kind exchanged between people who had shared something important and wanted to acknowledge the connection. Whatever happens in that meeting, she said, I want you to know that tonight mattered. You reminded me why I wanted to be a leader in the first place. Noah stood up from his desk. Will you let us know how it goes? Better than that, Madeline said with a smile that transformed her entire face. "If this goes the way I think it will, you're both going to be very busy tomorrow. I hope you're ready to stop being invisible." As she walked toward the elevator, Noah and Roger looked at each other with something they hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not the dangerous kind that leads to disappointment, but the earned kind that comes from being truly seen and valued. They had no way of knowing that in less than 12 hours, Noah's life would change in ways that none of them could imagine. But they both sensed that something fundamental had shifted, that the night they'd just shared had set forces in motion that would reach far beyond a single budget meeting. The healing had begun, not with therapy or time, but with the simple recognition that their struggles mattered, their expertise had value, and their humanity deserved respect. And that recognition was about to change everything. The Meridian Financial Tower boardroom occupied the entire northeast corner of the 40th floor, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a commanding view of the city that the company helped finance. At 7 a.m. sharp, 12 of the most powerful people in the regional business community took their seats around a mahogany table that cost more than most employees made in a year. Madeline Rivera had attended hundreds of board meetings, but none had felt quite like this. As she arranged her presentation materials at the head of the table, she could feel the weight of 37 lives hanging in the balance. 37 people who had trusted her to speak for them in a room where their voices had never been heard. Board Chairman William Hartfield called the meeting to order with the brisk efficiency of a man who valued time more than sentiment. First item on the agenda is the fiscal year budget review, with particular attention to operational cost. Optimization. Madeline, I believe you have recommendations regarding the night shift staffing contracts. Madeline stood, activated the presentation screen, and took a breath that carried 3 years of Noah's invisible expertise, 20 years of Roger's unrecognized competence, and 30 years of her mother's unacknowledged dignity. Thank you, Mr. Hartfield. Before I present my budget recommendations, I'd like to share some information that fundamentally changes how we should think about our night shift operations. The first slide appeared. Hidden assets, the true value of Meridian's invisible workforce. A murmur of confusion rippled around the table. Board member Patricia Thornton leaned forward. "I'm sorry, Madeline, but we're here to discuss cost reduction, not employee appreciation." "With respect, Patricia, I'm here to discuss the stupidest business decision this company could possibly make," Madeline replied, her voice steady and confident. "And that would be eliminating our night shift based on incomplete information." The room went silent. CFOs didn't typically challenge board members so directly, and they certainly didn't begin budget presentations with accusations of stupidity. Madeline clicked to the next slide. Case study number 1, Noah Johnson, data entry specialist. Noah's employment photo appeared next to a spreadsheet showing his official salary versus his actual value contribution. Mr. Johnson processes insurance claims for $18.50 per hour. But what he actually does is provide senior-level fraud analysis that has saved this company $2.3 million in the past year alone, board member David Martinez interrupted. "That's impossible. Fraud analysis is handled by our automated systems." "Our automated systems process paperwork," Madeline corrected. "Mr. Johnson investigates discrepancies. Last month alone, he identified 3 cases of attempted fraud that your AI systems approved for payment. Total fraudulent claims, $847,000. She clicked to the next slide, showing detailed case summaries. The electrical fire claim, where the homeowner was carrying a suitcase 15 minutes before the alleged start time. The water damage claim, where the basement flooding occurred during a week of 0 precipitation. The burglary claim, where the stolen jewelry was photographed in the claimant's social media posts 3 days after the alleged theft. The board members leaned forward, studying the details. These weren't theoretical savings. They were concrete, examples of money that would have been lost without human oversight. "How did our systems miss these?" asked Chief Technology Officer Sarah Kim. "Because artificial intelligence can process data, but it can't make phone calls to verify alibis," Madeline said. "It can't notice when someone's story changes between interviews. It can't smell desperation or hear the subtle inconsistencies that indicate coach testimony." She advanced to the next section. Case study number 2, Roger Roberts, Custodial Services. Roger's photo appeared alongside a list of maintenance issues he'd identified and prevented. Mr. Roberts empties trash cans for minimum wage, but what he actually does is function as an unpaid facilities consultant who has prevented millions in potential damages. The room was completely quiet now, all side conversations and electronic devices forgotten. The data center water leak that could have shut down our entire computer network. The heating system overload that would have required $800,000 in emergency replacement. The structural vibration in the north wing that indicated foundation settling. Mr. Roberts identified and addressed all of these issues before they became catastrophic failures. Board member Robert Chen cleared his throat. "Are you saying our facilities management company missed these problems?" "I'm saying our facilities management company doesn't work here at night," Madeline replied. "They don't hear the subtle changes in mechanical systems. They don't notice water stains that appear gradually over weeks. They don't feel the building settle and shift the way someone does who walks these halls for 8 hours every night." Click to a comprehensive financial analysis. If we outsource our night shift operations as recommended, we'll save approximately $890,000 annually in direct labor costs. But we'll lose at least $3.2 million in fraud prevention, maintenance savings, and security oversight that our current staff provides informally. The numbers were undeniable, presented with the same analytical rigor that the board demanded for all major decisions, but Madeline wasn't finished. "There's something else you need to understand about these people," she said, advancing to a slide titled Character Assets. "3 nights ago, I witnessed something that no business school teaches and no performance metric measures." She told them about Noah giving his dinner to Roger, about the dignity with which both men handled their circumstances, about the quiet competence they brought to jobs that underutilized their abilities by any reasonable measure. "We've been hiring overqualified people for entry-level positions because the economy has created a surplus of displaced professionals," Madeline continued. "We've been getting senior-level expertise for junior-level wages and calling it good business. But what we've actually been doing is building a workforce of people who care about this company's success because they understand what it means to lose everything." Board Chairman Hartfield had been silent throughout the presentation, but now he spoke. "What exactly are you proposing, Madeline?" "I'm proposing that we stop treating our night shift like an expense to be minimized and start treating them like the asset they've always been," she said. "I'm proposing that we formalize their roles to match their actual contributions. And I'm proposing that we use this as a pilot program for identifying underutilized talent throughout our organization." She clicked to her final slide. "New position classifications. Noah Johnson, Senior Claims Analyst, Night Operations. Salary, $75,000. Responsibility, fraud prevention and investigation for all after-hours claims processing. Roger Roberts, Facilities Operations Supervisor, Night Shift. Salary, $65,000. Responsibility, preventive maintenance oversight and building systems monitoring. Frank Kelly, Security Operations Coordinator. Salary, $55,000. Responsibility, personnel security assessment and threat identification." The board members exchanged glances. These weren't cost reductions. They were significant salary increases that would actually expand the budget. The total additional cost is $1.2 million annually, Madeline said. The documented savings from properly utilizing their expertise is $3.2 million net benefit to the company, $2 million per year, plus the incalculable value of having employees who are personally invested in our success. Patricia Thornton was the first to speak. This is a fascinating analysis, Madeline, but are you seriously suggesting we base corporate policy on kindness? Madeline smiled. I'm suggesting we base corporate policy on profitability. The kindness is just what makes it sustainable. It's sustainable. The room erupted in discussion. Some board members excited by the financial potential, others skeptical of the precedent it would set. But as the debate continued, one thing became clear. The invisible workforce of Meridian Financial Tower was about to become very visible indeed. When the vote was called 2 hours later, it was unanimous. Not because they'd been swayed by sentiment, but because Madeline had made an irrefutable business case for treating people with dignity. As the board members filed out, discussing implementation timelines and expansion possibilities, Madeline remained at the conference table, staring out at the city below. Somewhere in that sprawling urban landscape, Noah was probably sleeping after his night shift, unaware that his life was about to change dramatically. And somewhere else, 12 lawyers were preparing for a visit that would make the board meeting look like a minor adjustment, but that was still hours away. For now, Madeline savored the knowledge that her mother's daughter had just convinced a room full of executives that the measure of success wasn't just profit. It was the character of the people who created it. The transformation had begun. Noah Johnson woke up at 3 p.m. to the sound of his phone buzzing insistently on the nightstand. After years of night shift work, he'd trained himself to sleep through most disturbances, but this particular ringtone, the one reserved for work calls, cut through his exhaustion like an alarm. "Noah, it's Madeline Rivera," came the voice on the other end, and Noah immediately sat up in bed. CFOs didn't call data entry clerks at home, ever. "Ms. Rivera, is everything okay?" Noah asked, his mind racing through possibilities, none of them good. "More than okay," Madeline said, and Noah could hear something in her voice he'd never heard before, pure joy. "Noah, we need to talk. Can you meet me at the building in an hour? Bring Roger if you can reach him. Conference room 4015. An hour. Later, Noah and Roger stood outside a conference room on the 40th floor, executive territory neither of them had ever seen. Through the glass walls, they could see Madeline inside, with several other people in expensive suits. All of them looking expectant. "Are you sure we're supposed to be here?" Roger whispered as they approached the door. Before Noah could answer, Madeline opened the door and ushered them inside with a smile that transformed her entire appearance. "Gentlemen, I'd like you to meet some people." The introductions were surreal. Board members who had been abstract concepts, names on company newsletters and distant figures in annual reports, were suddenly real people shaking their hands and asking about their families. "Mr. Johnson," said Board Chairman William Hartfield, "I understand you've been doing some remarkable work in fraud prevention." Noah looked uncertainly at Madeline, who nodded encouragingly. I notice patterns, sir. Things that don't add up." "Well, your pattern recognition has saved this company millions of dollars," said Patricia Thornton. "We'd like to talk to you about expanding your role." What followed was the most surreal conversation of Noah's life. These executives, people who made decisions affecting thousands of employees, were asking for his input on fraud prevention protocols, his recommendations for improving the claims process, his thoughts on integrating human oversight with automated systems. Roger was having a similar experience with the facilities management team. We've been reviewing your informal maintenance reports, explained David Martinez. The board approved a new position this morning, Facilities Operations Supervisor for night shift. We'd like you to consider taking it. I don't understand, Roger said slowly. I'm a janitor. You're a facilities management expert who happens to empty trash cans, Madeline corrected gently. There's a difference. As the meeting progressed, Noah and Roger learned that their new positions came with more than just title changes. Significant salary increases, proper benefits, resources to do their jobs effectively, and most importantly, recognition for the expertise they'd been providing all along. There's one more thing, Madeline said as the formal meeting wound down. We want to create a new department. Hidden Asset Recovery. The goal is to identify other employees throughout the company whose skills are being underutilized. She turned to Noah and Roger. We'd like you both to help lead that initiative. You understand what it feels like to be overlooked. You'd know what to look for. Noah felt something shift inside his chest, a sensation he'd almost forgotten. The feeling of being valued for his mind rather than just his labor. You want us to help other people like us? We want you to help this company become the kind of place that recognizes talent regardless of where it's found, Madeline said. The kind of place my mother would have been proud to work for. Over the following weeks, the transformation of Meridian Financial Tower became the talk of the business community. Noah's fraud prevention program caught national attention when it uncovered a multi-million-dollar insurance scam that had fooled investigators at 3 other companies. Roger's maintenance protocols were implemented company-wide, resulting in a 40% reduction in emergency repair costs. But the real change was cultural. The Hidden Asset Recovery Program began identifying overlooked talent throughout the organization. A security guard who spoke 5 languages became the head of international client services. A receptionist with a photographic memory became the archive management coordinator. A maintenance worker with an engineering degree was promoted to head the new sustainability initiative. The night shift became a symbol of the company's commitment to recognizing human potential. Executive tours now included stops at the 32nd floor, where visitors could observe the after-hours operations that had become a model for employee empowerment. Noah found himself speaking at business conferences, sharing his story of how a turkey sandwich had led to a career transformation. Roger was featured in facilities management magazines as an example of how hands-on experience could be more valuable than formal credentials. But perhaps the most significant change was in Madeline herself, the executive who had once lived in isolation in her penthouse office, now made regular visits to every floor of the building. She knew the names of the security guards, the preferences of the cleaning staff, the concerns of the data processors. The numbers are impressive, she told a reporter from Business Weekly 6 months after the program launch. Employee satisfaction is up 60%, retention has improved dramatically, and our profit margins have increased by 15%, but the real success isn't measurable in dollars. What do you mean? The reporter asked. We've created a workplace where people feel seen, Madeline explained, where their contributions matter regardless of their job title. That's not just good business, it's good humanity. The partnership between Madeline, Noah, and Roger had evolved into something none of them had expected. They met weekly, not in conference rooms, but in the employee break room on the 32nd floor, planning new initiatives and discussing ways to expand the program to other companies. Their friendship had become the foundation for a business philosophy that was spreading throughout the industry. Other corporations were sending delegations to study Meridian's human asset optimization model. Business schools were developing case studies around their approach. But on quiet evenings, when the building settled into its nighttime rhythm, the three of them would sometimes gather in Noah's old cubicle, sharing coffee and remembering the night when everything changed. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't given Roger that sandwich?" Madeline asked one evening. Noah considered the question seriously. "I think someone else would have done something kind eventually. Good people find ways to take care of each other. But would the board have listened?" Roger wondered. Madeline smiled. "Maybe, but it wouldn't have mattered as much. What made the difference wasn't just the business case, it was understanding that the people making the numbers were worth fighting for." As they sat in the glow of the desk lamp, surrounded by the quiet energy of the night shift they had transformed, none of them mentioned the fact that Noah's story was about to take another unexpected turn, because at that very moment, 12 lawyers were reviewing documents that would reveal why Roger Roberts had been so interested in Noah's character, and why a simple act of kindness had triggered the most elaborate test of human nature ever conducted in corporate America. But that revelation was still hours away. For now, they simply enjoyed the satisfaction of knowing they had built something beautiful together, a workplace where dignity mattered as much as productivity, where character was valued alongside competence. The new partnership had created more than just better jobs. It had created hope that business could be a force for recognizing the best in people rather than exploiting their desperation. And tomorrow morning, that hope would be tested in ways none of them could imagine. At exactly 9 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, that started like any other, Noah Johnson answered his apartment door to find 12 people in expensive suits standing in the hallway outside his modest Brookfield Heights apartment. The lead figure, a distinguished woman with silver hair and kind eyes, stepped forward with a leather portfolio that looked like it contained documents worth more than Noah's annual salary. "Mr. Johnson, my name is Elizabeth Hartwell, senior partner at Hartwell, Morrison and Associates. We represent the estate of Roger Roberts. May we come in?" Noah's world tilted. "The estate of... I'm sorry, what?" "Mr. Roberts passed away peacefully in his sleep last night," she explained gently. "But before we discuss that, we need to tell you something about who he really was." 20 minutes later, Noah sat stunned in his small living room, surrounded by lawyers and documents that were rewriting everything he thought he knew about the man who had accepted his sandwich with such dignity. Roger Roberts wasn't just a former facilities manager, Elizabeth Hartwell explained, opening a folder that contained photographs, legal documents, and financial records. He was Roger Roberts, founder and CEO of Roberts Industries, one of the largest construction and facilities management companies in the Southeast. Noah stared at a photograph of Roger, his Roger, standing beside a gleaming office building wearing a suit that probably cost more than Noah made in a month. "I don't understand. Roberts Industries was worth approximately $340 million when Mr. Roberts sold it 5 years ago, another lawyer explained. He distributed most of the proceeds among his employees, keeping only a small portion for himself and his wife, Sarah. Sarah died of cancer 2 years later, Elizabeth continued. After her death, Mr. Roberts became interested in understanding human nature in its purest form. He wanted to know if kindness still existed when people had nothing left to gain from it." She handed Noah another document. "So he created what he called the sandwich test." Noah's hands trembled as he read the legal papers. The sandwich test was outlined in meticulous detail, a year-long experiment in human character conducted in corporate environments across the country. Roger Roberts had taken minimum wage jobs at major companies, presenting himself as a struggling worker while observing how he was treated by colleagues and superiors. "You were the 37th person he tested," Elizabeth said quietly, "and you were the first person who gave him something to eat." The room was silent, except for the ticking of Noah's second-hand clock and the distant sound of traffic outside. Noah read through the documentation, trying to process the magnitude of what he was learning. He tested 36 other people, Noah asked. CEOs who complained about the cost of coffee for employees while drinking $20 lattes, one lawyer explained. Managers who threw away catered lunch leftovers rather than offer them to custodial staff. Executives who walked past him when he was clearly struggling with heavy equipment. But you, Elizabeth said, gave him your only decent meal of the week, and you did it with such grace that he knew immediately you were different. She opened another folder. Mr. Roberts documented everything. Your kindness, your work ethic, your expertise that was being wasted. He was planning to reveal himself and help you when Meridian Financial Tower's budget crisis provided an even better opportunity. He arranged for Madeline Rivera to see your personnel files, Noah asked. He suggested she review them, yes. But everything that happened after that, your conversation, her decision to fight for the night shift, the board presentation, that was all authentic. Roger didn't manipulate the outcome. He just created the conditions for truth to emerge. Elizabeth handed Noah a final document, this one bearing the seal of a law firm that specialized in estate planning. Mr. Roberts left you something, Noah. Several things, actually. Noah's hands shook as he read the terms of Roger Roberts's will. The first bequest was straightforward, $2.5 million, enough to ensure that Noah would never have to worry about money again. But the second bequest was more complex and more meaningful. Roger had left detailed instructions for establishing the Roberts Foundation for Hidden Talent, a nationwide program designed to identify and elevate overlooked workers in corporate America. Noah was named as the foundation's director, with full authority to implement the vision they had developed together at Meridian Financial Tower. There's also this, Elizabeth said, handing him a handwritten letter in Roger's careful script. Dear Noah, if you're reading this, then my time has ended, but hopefully our work is just beginning. You probably think what happened at Meridian was about business or policy or corporate reform. It wasn't. It was about character. In 37 tests, you were the only person who saw a struggling human being and responded with immediate generosity. You didn't ask questions, you didn't hesitate, you didn't calculate the cost, you just gave. That kind of character is rarer than any skill, more valuable than any expertise. It's the foundation upon which everything good in this world is built. I've left you resources to continue what we started, but the real work, the work of recognizing dignity in everyone you meet, that's something you were already doing long before you met me. Take care of the invisible people, Noah. They're the ones who keep the world running. Your friend, Roger P.S. The turkey sandwich was delicious. Best meal I'd had in months. Noah set the letter down and looked around his small apartment, the same apartment where he'd struggled to pay rent, where he'd eaten sardines and wondered if anyone would ever value his expertise again. In the span of a few months, he had gone from invisible data entry clerk to fraud prevention specialist to foundation director with resources to help thousands of people like himself. But more than the money, more than the recognition, what overwhelmed him was the knowledge that his simple act of kindness had meant so much to someone that they had built their final legacy around it. 6 months later, the Roberts Foundation had identified and elevated over 200 overlooked employees at companies across the country. Former janitors became operations managers, displaced engineers returned to their fields, security guards became department heads. Each promotion came with Roger's story, spreading the message that character matters as much as competence. Madeline Rivera left her position as CFO to become the foundation's chief strategy officer, using her business expertise to convince corporations that investing in hidden talent was the smartest long-term strategy they could pursue. The Meridian Financial Tower became a pilgrimage site for business leaders wanting to understand how recognizing human dignity could transform corporate culture. The 32nd floor, where it all began, was preserved exactly as it had been the night Noah gave away his sandwich. On the first anniversary of Roger's death, Noah stood in that cubicle, holding the original turkey sandwich wrapper that Elizabeth Hartwell had returned to him. Apparently, Roger had kept it as evidence of the moment his faith in humanity was restored. "I still don't understand why he chose me," Noah said to Madeline, who stood beside him in the quiet office space. "Because you chose him," she replied simply. "When you saw someone who needed help, you didn't see a cost-benefit analysis. You saw a person." As they stood in the dim light of the building that had changed all their lives, Noah thought about the ripple effects of kindness, how a single sandwich had somehow triggered a transformation that was now affecting thousands of people across the country. Roger Roberts had been testing whether goodness still existed in a world that seemed to reward selfishness. Noah Johnson had provided the answer, not through words or intentions, but through action. And that answer, that kindness persists, that character matters, that dignity deserves recognition, had become the foundation of a legacy that would outlive them all. The invisible people were invisible no more. And it had all started with a turkey sandwich and the courage to see another person's hunger as more important than your own. Some tests, Noah realized, were never really about the person being tested. They were about revealing what was already there, waiting for the right moment to shine. 5 years later, Noah Johnson stood before a packed auditorium at Harvard Business School, finishing his keynote address about the Roberts Foundation's impact. In the front row sat Madeline Rivera and dozens of former invisible employees who had become leaders in their fields. The Roberts Foundation has now identified and elevated over 3,000 overlooked workers in 47 cities, Noah said, clicking to his final slide. But the real victory isn't in our numbers. It's in moments like this morning, when I watched a new intern at Meridian Financial offer her umbrella to our custodian during a rainstorm. She had no idea that custodian has a master's degree in engineering. She just saw someone who needed help. He paused, looking out at the audience of future business leaders. Roger Roberts taught us that character is the rarest resource in business, and it reveals itself in the smallest acts of kindness when we think no one is watching. After the applause died down, Noah walked to a simple memorial display in the university's lobby, a preserved turkey sandwich wrapper under glass, with Roger's words etched below. "The most important tests are the ones we don't know we're taking." A young business student approached, reading the inscription. "Excuse me, Professor Johnson, what does this mean? What does this mean?" Noah smiled, thinking of Emma, of Roger, of that night when everything changed over a simple sandwich. It means that somewhere today, someone will choose kindness over convenience, not knowing that choice will define their entire future. But the revolution continues, one small act of humanity